In the crystalline spires of New Shanghai's Interstellar Embassy, Sarah Chen stood before the holographic display, her heart racing as she processed the information scrolling before her eyes. After 15 years as humanity's lead diplomat to the Centaurian Alliance, she had learned to read between the lines of alien communication. Something wasn't right. The latest transmissions from the outer colony showed unusual patterns, ships moving in ways that defied standard trade routes, communication buoys going dark one by one. To anyone else, it might have looked like routine technical failures, but Sarah had spent too long studying the delicate dance of galactic politics to believe in coincidences. Ambassador Chen, the Vorax delegation requests your presence. The AI's voice interrupted her thoughts, its tone carefully neutral. The Vorax, a species that had emerged from the depths of unexplored space just months ago, their crystalline ships appearing at the edge of human space like stars materializing from nowhere. Sarah straightened her formal diplomatic robes, a blend of traditional Chinese design and modern Earth fashion that had become her trademark. She wasn't a soldier like most humans who made first contact. She didn't carry a weapon or wear powered armor. Her weapons were words, cultural understanding, and 3 degrees in xenopsychology. The Vorax waiting in the reception chamber stood nearly 3 meters tall, their iridescent exoskeletons catching the light like living opals. Ambassador Kexri, their lead representative, turned all 4 eyes toward her as she entered. Diplomat Chen. They clicked in their native tongue, which Sarah had mastered through countless hours of study. We bring news from the Rim. But Sarah had already pieced it together. The Vorax weren't here for routine diplomacy. They were refugees, running from something they couldn't fight, something that had already consumed dozens of worlds. "Show me," she said simply, and Kexri activated a holographic display that filled the chamber with stars. Red markers spread across the map like a virus, showing the advance of an unknown force that devoured everything in its path. The Vorax, for all their technological advancement, had been powerless to stop it. "We did not come to your space by chance," Kexri admitted, their crystalline form dimming slightly, a sign of shame in their culture. "We came because our scholars found references to humanity in ancient archives. Your species, you have faced extinction before, multiple times. Yet you survive. You adapt. You overcome." Sarah felt the weight of history on her shoulders. Humanity had indeed faced countless threats: climate change, nuclear war, the first disastrous contact with the Centaurians that nearly led to mutual destruction. Each time, they had survived not through superior firepower or technology, but through innovation, cooperation, and a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. "The thing pursuing you," Sarah said carefully, "it consumes technology, adapts to whatever fights it." Kexri's crystal lattice pulsed with affirmation. "Our most advanced weapons only made it stronger. Our strongest shields became its armor. We cannot fight it with force." A smile slowly spread across Sarah's face as pieces clicked into place in her mind. "Then perhaps," she said, "it's time we tried something it's never encountered before. Tell me, Ambassador Kexri, has your people ever heard of the concept of a Trojan horse?" The next few hours were a blur of activity as Sarah laid out her plan to both human and Vorax leadership. It was audacious, perhaps even foolish. It didn't involve advanced weapons or military might. Instead, it would require something uniquely human: the ability to think laterally, to solve problems in ways that defied conventional logic. "You want to do what?" Admiral Zhao's hologram flickered with interference, or perhaps it was just his expression of disbelief. "We're going to welcome it," Sarah explained, her voice steady despite the audacity of her proposal. "Every force you've encountered has either run or fought, correct?" she asked Kexri, who confirmed with a crystalline chime. "So we do neither. We open our arms to it. And while it's trying to understand why we're not following the pattern, we implement the real plan." As she outlined the details, she saw the moment understanding dawned in both human and Vorax eyes. It was crazy enough that it just might work. And more importantly, it was something the enemy would never expect, because it required something beyond pure logic or military strategy. It required understanding of psychology, of culture, of the fundamental nature of intelligence itself. Sarah Chen wasn't a soldier. She had never fired a weapon in combat or commanded a starship in battle. But as she stood there, bridging the gap between two species and crafting a plan to save them both, she realized that sometimes the greatest victories don't require a single shot to be fired. The next few days would prove whether she was right, whether humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its ability to fight, but in its ability to think differently, to connect, to find solutions where others saw only problems. Either way, the galaxy was about to learn why humans had survived every catastrophe they'd ever faced, not because they were the strongest, but because they were the most adaptable. And as she looked out at the stars through the embassy's crystal windows, Sarah Chen prepared herself for the greatest diplomatic challenge in human history. The fate of two species now rested not on the shoulders of a warrior, but on those of a woman who believed that understanding was the most powerful force in the universe. When peace fails, the entity arrived exactly as the Vorax had predicted, a massive dark mass that seemed to drink in light itself. Sarah watched from the observation deck as it approached New Shanghai's orbital stations, her hands clasped tightly behind her back to hide their trembling. "First contact protocols are ready," her AI assistant reported. "Though I must note that all previous attempts at communication have failed." "Previous attempts weren't made by humans," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We're particularly stubborn when it comes to making ourselves understood." The entity had consumed 12 Vorax worlds and 3 independent trading posts. Each time, it had followed the same pattern: approach, envelope, absorb. Any technology it encountered became part of it. Any resistance made it stronger. The Vorax had tried fighting with increasingly advanced weapons, only to watch their own technology turned against them. But Sarah had spent the last week studying everything they knew about the entity, and she had noticed something everyone else had missed. It didn't just absorb technology. It learned from it. It adapted based on what it encountered, which meant, fundamentally, it was capable of learning. And if it could learn, it could be taught. "Broadcasting on all frequencies," she announced, and began to speak not in any known galactic language, but in pure mathematics. Prime numbers, simple equations, the building blocks of communication that any intelligent entity should recognize. The massive form before them paused its advance. "It's working." Kexri's crystalline form pulsed with excitement. "It's never stopped before." Sarah didn't respond, focused entirely on her task. After mathematics came simple symbolic logic, then basic concepts represented through universally recognizable patterns. She was establishing the foundations of communication with an entity that had never shown interest in communicating before. But then something went wrong. The entity suddenly surged forward, faster than before, its dark mass extending tendrils toward the nearest orbital station. Emergency alarms blared throughout the complex. "It's not stopping." Admiral Zhou's voice crackled over the comm. "Chen, we need to evacuate." "No." Sarah cut him off, her mind racing. "No, this is different. Look at the pattern of its approach. It's not trying to absorb the station. It's trying to reach us specifically. It wants to communicate, but it doesn't know how." "That's a hell of a gamble, Ambassador," Zhou growled. "Humanity's greatest achievements have always been gambles," Sarah replied, then turned to Kexri. "Ambassador, I need your help. Your species communicates partially through crystalline resonance, correct? Can you broadcast on a frequency that would interact with its mass?" The Vorax's external lattice flickered with understanding. Together, they created something entirely new, a hybrid form of communication that combined mathematical principles, crystalline resonance, and patterns derived from human music theory. It was beautiful, complex, and utterly unlike anything the entity had encountered before. The dark mass stopped again, but this time it began to change. Its surface rippled and shifted, forming patterns that mimicked the signals they were sending. It was learning, adapting not to fight, but to understand. For 3 tense hours, they continued this exchange, gradually building a framework of mutual comprehension. Sarah's head pounded from the effort of tracking the complex patterns, but she couldn't stop. This was the moment everything hinged on. Finally, through their improvised communication method, they began to understand. The entity wasn't a weapon or a mindless consumer of worlds. It was a refugee, like the Vorax, but on a much grander scale. It came from a universe that was dying, seeking out technology and information in a desperate attempt to find a way to save its own reality. "You've been going about this all wrong," Sarah transmitted through their new communication channel. "You don't need to take our technology by force. We can help you understand it. We can work together." The entity's response came in a complex wave of mathematical and crystalline signals that their hastily assembled translation matrix rendered as previous species only attacked, only fled. You, different. You seek to understand. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Understanding is humanity's greatest weapon. We've survived our own near extinctions because we learned to work together, to communicate, to find solutions that benefit everyone. Let us help you do the same. The dark mass shifted again, taking on a form that somehow seemed less threatening. It wasn't just adapting anymore. It was choosing to change, to become something that could interact with them, rather than consume them. Admiral Zhou's voice came over the comm again, softer this time. "I'll be damned. You actually did it, Chen. You made first contact with something that wasn't even trying to make contact." But Sarah knew this was just the beginning. They had opened a dialogue, but now came the hard part. Finding a way to actually help an entity from another universe save its dying reality. It would require combining human ingenuity, Vorax crystalline technology, and whatever strange physics the entity understood from its own universe. As she looked at the now transformed entity hovering peacefully before them, Sarah Chen realized that this was why she had become a diplomat. Not to prevent wars or negotiate treaties, but to build bridges between forms of life, so different they shouldn't even be able to comprehend each other's existence. The real work was just beginning, and she couldn't wait to get started. The bridge builder. Impossible. The Vorax quantum physicist's crystalline form flickered with frustration. The mathematical principles the entity describes violate every known law of physics. Sarah Chen stood in the midst of the hastily assembled research center, surrounded by holographic equations that seemed to twist in ways that hurt her eyes. 2 weeks had passed since first contact with the entity, which they now called the Nexus, and they were no closer to understanding how to save its dying universe. Perhaps that's exactly the point, Sarah mused, studying the strange patterns. We're trying to solve this using our universe's physics, but the Nexus comes from somewhere with different rules entirely. The research center had become a unique collaboration of minds. Human scientists worked alongside Vorax crystal tech experts, while the Nexus itself provided insights through the communication system Sarah had helped develop. But they were all stuck thinking within their own paradigms. "Tell me about your universe again," Sarah asked the Nexus, using their hybrid communication method. "Not the technical details. Tell me how it feels." The response came in waves of mathematical poetry. Space bends differently there. Time flows like crystal growth, branching and recursive. Energy cascades through dimensions you cannot see. But the branches are withering, the cascades failing. Reality itself is unraveling. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the alien concepts wash over her. Then she remembered something from her studies of human history. "Dr. Patel," she called to one of the human scientists. "What was that theory from the 21st century about universe bubbles? The multiverse membrane theory." Dr. Patel looked up from his equations. It was mostly discredited, but it suggested that universes could be viewed as membranes floating in a higher dimensional space, occasionally colliding or interacting. What if it wasn't entirely wrong? Sarah began to pace, her mind racing. What if it just didn't go far enough? The Nexus universe operates on different physical laws, yes, but it still interacts with ours. It found its way here. That means there must be some underlying principles that connect everything. The Vorax physicist's crystal lattice pulsed with sudden understanding. Our ancestors' records speak of similar theories. We abandoned them in favor of more practical research. But maybe we all gave up too soon. Sarah finished. We're not looking for a way to save the Nexus's universe using our physics. We're looking for the bridge between all physics. The next few days were a blur of activity. Sarah coordinated teams across species, encouraging them to think beyond their traditional boundaries. Human theoretical physicists worked with Vorax crystal engineers, their ideas interpreted through the Nexus's alien perspective. They had breakthroughs and setbacks. Twice, experimental equipment exploded when they tried to bridge the gap between universal constants. A Vorax crystal matrix shattered when they attempted to channel energy patterns from the Nexus's realm. But with each failure, they learned more. It's like translation, Sarah explained during one particularly frustrating moment. When I learned Vorax language, I had to understand that some concepts simply didn't exist in human terms. We had to create new ways of thinking to bridge the gap. Maybe physics works the same way. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A junior human researcher, recently graduated and still unencumbered by traditional theoretical limitations, noticed a pattern in the failed experiments. The energy wasn't dispersing randomly. It was following paths that looked remarkably like the growth patterns of Vorax crystals, which in turn resembled the way the Nexus described time flowing in its home universe. What if, the young researcher suggested, we're not trying to change the laws of physics, but to grow new ones? It was a radical idea, but it led them down a new path. Using Vorax crystal technology as a framework, they began to design what Sarah called a universal bridge, a structure that could exist simultaneously in multiple physical paradigms, allowing energy and matter to flow between them in stable ways. The prototype was beautiful, a crystalline lattice that seemed to exist partially out of phase with normal space, glowing with energies that shouldn't be possible in our universe. When they activated it, the Nexus response was immediate and emotional, transmitted in pure mathematical joy. The withering slows, it communicated. The cascades stabilize. It is hope. But Sarah knew they weren't finished. The prototype was just that, a proof of concept. To save an entire universe would require something on a scale never before attempted. It would mean convincing hundreds of worlds to contribute resources and knowledge to a project that defied conventional physics. As she prepared for the upcoming Galactic Council meeting, where she would have to present their findings, Sarah reflected on how far they'd come. They had moved from first contact to cooperation to innovation in a matter of weeks, all because they had been willing to look past surface differences and find common ground in the most fundamental ways. "You know," Admiral Joe said, joining her at the observation window, "when you first proposed talking to the entity, I thought you were crazy. Now I'm watching humans and Vorax build a bridge between universes. Makes me wonder what else we've dismissed as impossible just because we couldn't shoot at it." Sarah smiled. That's humanity's real strength, isn't it? Not our ability to fight or our technology, but our ability to imagine solutions that no one else has thought of. To build bridges where others see only voids. The prototype crystal pulsed behind them, its impossible light casting shadows that seemed to bend in ways that shouldn't exist. But then, Sarah thought, the impossible had always been humanity's favorite challenge. Trial by fire. The Galactic Council chamber was silent as Sarah concluded her presentation. Representatives from 37 spacefaring civilizations sat in tiered rows, their varied forms illuminated by the holographic display of the Universal Bridge prototype. Some showed signs she recognized as skepticism, others as fear. "Let me understand this clearly," the Meridian ambassador's telepathic voice echoed in their minds. "You propose to create a permanent bridge between our universe and one that is actively collapsing. Have you considered the dangers? Before Sarah could respond, alarms blared throughout the chamber. Emergency displays flickered to life, showing a massive energy surge from the research facility where they'd been developing the bridge technology. "It's destabilizing," Dr. Patel's panicked voice came through Sarah's comm. "The prototype. Something's wrong with the quantum matrix. The energy patterns are cascading out of control." Sarah's blood ran cold. They had tested the prototype extensively, but scaling up the experiments had introduced new variables. Now those variables threatened to tear apart not just the project, but potentially the fabric of space-time itself. "Evacuate the facility," Admiral Zhao commanded over the general channel. "Get everyone out." "No," Sarah interrupted, her mind racing. "If that bridge collapses completely, it could create a cascade effect between universes. We have to stabilize it." She turned to the council, seeing the fear in their alien faces. "This is exactly why we need your help. Each of your species understands different aspects of reality. Together, we might have a chance to prevent disaster." The next few hours were a desperate race against time. Sarah coordinated teams across species, each contributing their unique insights. The Vorax's crystal technology provided the framework, while Meridian telepaths helped coordinate the complex adjustments needed across multiple facilities. The Nexus itself proved crucial, its understanding of trans-universal physics, helping them identify the point of failure. The problem wasn't in their calculations or technology. It was simpler and more profound than that. "The bridge isn't failing," Sarah realized, studying the patterns. "It's growing too quickly, like a seedling that shoots up too fast and can't support its own weight." Working with the combined scientific teams, they developed a solution that was both elegant and terrifying. Instead of trying to force the bridge to conform to their expectations, they would let it grow naturally, but guide its development using principles from all their combined sciences. "It's like gardening," Sarah explained to the council as they implemented the changes. "We're not building a bridge anymore, we're growing one. And like any garden, it needs multiple elements to thrive." The Meridian telepaths provided the equivalent of a nervous system, allowing precise control over energy flows. Vorax crystal technology formed the structure, while human innovation helped adapt the design in real time. The Nexus itself acted as a guide, its understanding of its home universe, helping shape the bridge's growth. For 3 tense days, they nursed the prototype through its crisis. Sarah barely slept, coordinating between species, making split-second decisions that could affect 2 universes. But slowly, steadily, the bridge stabilized. When it was over, they had something far beyond their original design. The bridge had evolved into something new, a living interface between universes that could adapt and grow stronger over time. "It's beautiful," the Meridian ambassador admitted, watching the synchronized patterns of energy flow through the structure. "We were wrong to doubt your species, Ambassador Chen." But Sarah shook her head. "No, you were right to be cautious. What matters is that when crisis came, we all worked together. That's the real achievement here." As the council chambers cleared, Admiral Zhao approached her. "You know what this means, don't you? This isn't just about saving the Nexus's universe anymore. We've discovered a way for fundamentally different realities to coexist and interact safely. You've changed everything." Sarah looked at the holographic display of the bridge, its impossible geometries now stable and strong. "No," she said softly, "we've changed everything. Humans, Vorax, Meridians, the Nexus, we each brought something essential to this solution. That's what humanity does best. We don't just solve problems. We bring people together to solve them in ways no one could manage alone." The crisis had passed, but Sarah knew this was just the beginning. They had proven that differences weren't barriers. They were building blocks for something greater. As she watched representatives from dozens of species beginning to work together on plans to expand the bridge network, she realized they had created something even more important than a connection between universes. They had created hope. Legacy of understanding. 5 years later, Sarah Chen stood in the observation dome of Nexus Station, watching ships from a dozen different species dock with the massive structure. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built around a network of universal bridges that pulsed with impossible energies. Hard to believe it all started with a misunderstanding, Admiral Joe said, joining her at the window. He had aged in the intervening years, but his eyes still held the same wonder when he looked at the bridges. We thought the Nexus was an invader. The Vorax thought it was a weapon, and it thought it was alone in its struggle. Sarah smiled, watching a crystalline Vorax ship synchronize its approach with a dark, flowing vessel that resembled the Nexus's original form. Sometimes, the greatest discoveries come from our mistakes. We just have to be willing to learn from them. The station had become more than just a scientific outpost. It was a symbol of what was possible when different species, different universes, worked together. The original bridge network had not only stabilized the Nexus's dying universe, but had opened up new avenues of research and exploration that no one had imagined possible. Ambassador Chen, a melodic voice called. Sarah turned to seek Hill, a young Vorax diplomat who had been part of the first wave of students in the new Inter-Universal Diplomatic Corps. The conference is ready to begin. The conference chamber was packed with representatives from both universes. Sarah took her place at the podium, looking out at faces both familiar and utterly alien. Some existed in spectrums of reality she couldn't even perceive without technical assistance. Yet they were all here, working together. 5 years ago, she began, we faced what seemed like an impossible choice between survival and destruction. Instead, we found a third option: cooperation. Today, we're not just surviving, we're thriving. The universal bridges have allowed us to share knowledge, resources, and understanding across boundaries we once thought absolute. She gestured to the massive display showing the bridge network, now spanning multiple sectors of space in both universes. But the real bridges we've built aren't the ones you can see. They're the connections between people, between species, between ways of thinking that once seemed incompatible. The achievements had been remarkable. Vorax crystal technology, combined with Nexus physics and human innovation, had revolutionized everything from medicine to space travel. The Meridian telepaths had discovered they could communicate across universal boundaries, opening up entirely new fields of study in consciousness and reality. We stand at a crossroads, Sarah continued. The bridges we've built have shown us that difference isn't a barrier to understanding. It's a source of strength. Every species, every universe brings something unique to our collective knowledge. Our challenge now is to keep growing, keep learning, keep building connections. After the conference, Sarah returned to the observation dome. The view had changed in 5 years, but it still filled her with awe. Ships of all designs moved in careful patterns around the station, their pilots coordinating across species and realities with practiced ease. You've done well. A familiar pattern of mathematical poetry reached her. The Nexus had evolved too, learning to communicate in ways that were easier for organic minds to comprehend while still maintaining its unique perspective. We've all done well, Sarah corrected. Did you ever imagine, when you first entered our universe, that we'd end up here? Impossible to imagine, the Nexus responded. That was the problem. We all thought we knew what was impossible. You taught us to question those limitations. Sarah watched as a group of students passed through the dome. Humans, Vorax, and several species from the Nexus's universe, all engaged in animated discussion about some theoretical problem. They moved between realities as easily as their ancestors had moved between continents. That's the real legacy, she said softly. Not the bridges or the technology, but the understanding that there's always another way, always a possibility we haven't considered yet. All we have to do is be willing to look for it. As she stood there, watching the impossible become routine, Sarah Chen reflected on how far they'd come. She had started as a diplomat trying to prevent a crisis, become a bridge builder between universes, and ended up helping to forge a future no one had imagined possible. She wasn't a soldier. She had never commanded a fleet or won a battle. But she had done something perhaps more important. She had shown that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its ability to fight or to conquer, but in its ability to adapt, to understand, and to bring people together. The bridges between universes pulsed with their strange, beautiful light, and Sarah smiled. In the end, that light wasn't just connecting different realities. It was illuminating the path to a future where the impossible was just the beginning.